On this database of names, we intend to provide online authentication services. What that means is that once this database is built, or even if it's partially built, anyone in this database can go to any authentication point in the country, and if he gives his name and his number and gives his thumbprint or whichever finger he wants, you can check online against that central database and you can get an authentication that the person is who he or she claims to be. And this online authentication is a very, very important feature that nobody's really implemented online authentication for individuals. We have online authentication for credit cards, but not for individuals. And in this model, we will have an open architecture where you can go to any point and authenticate who you are. Again, you may think this is trivial, but it's actually fundamental to all the challenges of verification we have in the country. And this online authentication in the UID will happen through a cell phone. So if you have a cell phone and a fingerprint reader, then if somebody comes to your place and says that he's Mr. X, then he puts his finger on the fingerprint reader. The fingerprint, that whole image is compressed and all that and sent as a mobile phone GPRS call to the central database. It verifies that he's Mr. X. If it is not, it says no or yes. So yes, no is the only answer you will get from a database. But we will provide online authentication in less than 5 seconds across the country for any transaction that you want. What this means is that you can redesign your applications to deliver authentication or build authentication into your business model. In other words, your PDS application would be redesigned to say that if somebody comes to collect his rice and wheat for the month, then we authenticate that he indeed is the person who's entitled to get this money. Or if that pregnant lady in the JSY program is coming for institutional delivery, we can just take a finger on the machine and check that she's the right lady, and so on and so forth. So this combination of having a central depository, which will have one record per person with biometrics and no duplicates, and the ability to do online authentication, essentially is one more platform which we have. In other words, just like we talked about the core banking and the ATM network as platforms, just as we talked about the internet and mobile phone as platforms, UID will also become a platform which we add to this whole puzzle that we have. And we believe that it is these networks or these platforms, once they start interacting with each other in the way that we want, that will then lay the foundation for the kind of inclusive growth that we want. Now, going back to the examples I gave you, I talked about the fact that an NREGA worker has to walk 25 kilometers to the nearest bank. The question then comes is, how do we take banking to the people instead of taking people to the bank? And in some sense, we solve this problem in the more prosperous world, right? Your ATMs and your point of sale is nothing but on your internet banking access essentially took banking to the people instead of you to the bank. You can now get up in the middle of the night on the ATM, you can do a transaction, you can walk next door to your ATM and withdraw the money and so forth. So in other words, for those people in the prosperous part of our economy, we have solved the problem of taking the banking to the people at any time, anywhere. But how do we extend this to every village? And that becomes the challenge. And we think that's where these technologies will come in, because once you have the UID kind of authentication, then in any village you can have a business correspondent who has a mobile phone and a fingerprint reader, and he can become something like a micro ATM. In other words, and already the Reserve Bank is talking of the policy of how BC should be opened up, because it's very clear, Dr. Chakti also was mentioning in the morning, the only way you're going to extend the reach of branches to every village is by having some kind of a business correspondent who can do cash transactions. There is no way we can, today we only have 60 to 70,000 branches in the country. And it simply will not be economical to take a branch to every village. The only way to extend the reach of the bank to every village is to be having something like business correspondents. But then what is the technology platform we give to the business correspondent in the village to do the same transaction that I get when I go to an ATM in Hyderabad? And that's why you need to create a low-cost substitute which provides essentially an ATM equivalent transaction capability in the village in a Kirana store, which allows the person who goes there to do all the things that you can do in an ATM, except that instead of going to an ATM to do it, you go to a Kirana store to do it. And that is possible because the UID will essentially give the fundamental authentication infrastructure to confirm that the person coming to the Kirana store is the person who is entitled to the money. So how will this work? In the model that we propose, there will be a BC or two in every village. That BC could be any Kirana store or anyone that the Reserve Bank allows to have these kind of operations. That person will be equipped with a phone. He'll be equipped with a fingerprint reader, and he will have an ATM kind of software. In other words, software which mimics an ATM on a cell phone. And let's say that the NREGA worker who comes, and the NREGA worker has worked for 2 weeks and knows that he has received 800 rupees in his bank account, then he can come to the BC and he says, I'm Mr. X and I want to withdraw my money. And then the BC or the Kirana store fellow will say, put your finger here, and you put the finger there and it'll go to the UID system and authenticate and come back saying, yes, it is Mr. X. Then Mr. X will say, I want to withdraw 500 rupees from my account. And then the Kirana store will take 500 rupees cash from his money, his cash, and give the 500 rupees to the NREGA worker, and along with that there will be a financial transaction on the back end which debits the NREGA worker's bank account and credits the BC's bank account. In other words, there's a cash transaction here and a financial transaction at the back, and that's how you're able to actually convert that BC with a small device into something like a local ATM. And like that you can create, and the total cost of this sort of micro ATM is going to be 5,000 rupees. So it's not, you don't need fancy ATMs. The other advantage we believe of this model, two things: it reduces the cash going up and down because you're doing the transactions on somewhere on the back end. And second, cash will remain within the system. In other words, for example, today if you look at the mobile phones, they're selling thousands of crores of prepaid talk time in villages. So all these Kirana stores are getting cash from the sale of talk time. On this side, they're giving cash out as payments on NREGA. So basically, the cash remains in local circulation in the village, and therefore actually your cash management challenges will come down because cash does not have to go up and down in this model. And therefore, if you're able to create these low-cost micro ATMs with UID authentication, where you have a UID authentication and you have an ATM-like transaction, in effect you can create a sort of a micro ATM in every Kirana store. And that is the only way you can do this, because ATMs cost lakhs of rupees, point of sale costs thousands of, and then the whole issue of moving cash around. Here you're leveraging the cash liquidity of the Kirana store as part of the cash of the micro ATM. So this fundamentally it's a different model. And we think the transaction is very simple. The transaction will be the NREGA worker comes in, he does the UID authentication, he does the financial transaction, and then both the person coming in, that is the NREGA worker and the Kirana store owner, both put their fingerprint on the transaction to non-repudiate it. So this simple thing, authentication, financial transaction, non-repudiation, is the core activity of all transactions. So once you define this envelope of authentication, financial transaction, and non-repudiation, then the financial transaction inside that wrapper could be a withdrawal, could be a deposit, could be a transfer, it could be an inquiry. So everything that you can do in any bank, you can do within this wrapper. And therefore, in a quick way, we're actually now extending the reach of the whole network to all these people. Now, the